What's up, welcome back to Nowstalgia. Dave here with a review of the Super Mario Galaxy movie, the sequel, the follow-up to the Super Mario Brothers movie from 2023, the first time an animated Mario film had been put to screen by Nintendo and Illumination, of course, the landmark studio at this point behind the Despicable Me and Minions franchise. Mario 2023 represented Nintendo for the first time taking their blockbuster, decades-running franchises to the big screen. And to the surprise of nobody, Mario 2023 was a massive hit, grossing over $1.3 billion at the box office. At the time, that was the second highest grossing animated film behind Frozen 2. It's actually since been surpassed by Ne Zha 2, Inside Out 2, and Zootopia 2 in the 3 years that followed. Animation, specifically animation IP and sequels, has been very successful, even if original animation has been a bit more challenged. Nevertheless, we're here with the inevitable sequel, Super Mario Galaxy movie. I was perhaps a bit surprised that they were immediately jumping to Super Mario Galaxy, given those games, those entries in the Mario 3D platforming franchise are on the newer side. But given that these movies are wholly original, not really taking any true story inspiration from the games, it's not actually that big of a deal. If you're going into the Super Mario Galaxy movie looking for faithful renderings of the blockbuster franchise you know and love, you'll get that once again with this sequel. The animation style, the sound effects, everything appears as it should be. And if you're happy to see numerous Mario and greater Nintendo Easter eggs throughout this film, you will also be quite satisfied. Does that mean this movie actually works well as a movie in terms of its structure, in terms of its pace, in terms of its general storytelling? No, not at all. This film moves even quicker than its predecessor, but is also a lot less inviting. There are barely any story beats to speak of as we just move from set piece to set piece, and all of these action moments are calling back to various Mario and Nintendo references. So the faithful will understand what they're seeing. It's truly one of those things that defies all normal convention because it's so clearly conceived and created for the most hardcore believers only. The increasing scope of the Easter eggs and Nintendo references was pretty welcome. I think the future of Mario and Nintendo at large on the big screen is pretty tantalizing. You just got to get on board and ride the wave. And again, like as I said, there's not a ton of story here. There are, more characters, Think about the first film. I think the first film did a good job of establishing a lot of Mario staples, with Mario, his brother Luigi, Peach, Toad, Bowser, Donkey Kong. We saw a lot of familiar faces, right? And all of them except Donkey Kong return in the Super Mario Galaxy movie. And as alluded to in the post-credits scene of the previous film, Yoshi joins the fray this time around, really showing up in the first scene of Mario Galaxy movie. And Yoshi hasn't really beat the pet allegations, to be honest. Not much of a character, not much of an entity, voiced by Donald Glover. This is kind of like the way Vin Diesel voiced Groot in Guardians of the Galaxy, where he's not really doing too much. I contrast with Charlie Day as Luigi is my favorite voice performance here. I think he does a great job. Jack Black also, of course, returns as the voice of Bowser, and we, of course, return to Bowser imprisoned, shrunken down following the events of the first movie. And I think some of the most consistent comedy in the film, and definitely the most hilarious stuff I saw, was everything with Bowser while he was still small. I think all that stuff is great. I think Jack Black brings a lot to the character with his, vocal performance. Jack Black, as we've talked about recently, following the success of Minecraft last year, has pretty easily established himself as one of the most successful box office stars when it comes to kids programming. That being said, Jack Black / Bowser does not get nearly as big of a moment in this movie versus the big musical number from the first movie that was so widely liked. Apart from Yoshi, we're also introduced to Bowser Jr., voiced, I think, quite well by Benny Safdie. Really good vocal performance from Benny, just because it didn't really sound like him all that much. I thought he was doing a pretty good job. And I think the Bowser Jr. character and his relationship with his father Bowser and their relationship, it's incredibly thin. It is very surface level, but I at least appreciate that there was a little bit more depth laid upon them and giving a little bit more to the Bowser character. This movie kind of keeps the kid gloves on with Bowser. He's not truly villainous for most of the movie, and even the way it concludes, becoming Dry Bowser at the end there, he's kind of like a big goof most of the time and less of a, evil princess kidnapper, world conqueror type thing. And even Bowser Jr., they kind of cut him down at the knees a little bit because he's so motivated just to connect with his dad, who's been largely absent. But to me, Bowser Jr. was definitely the best new character of the bunch, because the other big new character was Rosalina, the key figure from the Super Mario Galaxy games, and she's voiced by Brie Larson. And we got a lot of star power throughout the voice cast here, but frankly, Rosalina has very little to do in this movie. A little bit in the beginning, a little bit in the end. There's a twist, a reveal. This time around, Rosalina and Princess Peach are in fact sisters, something that has not been explicitly stated in any of the Galaxy games to this point. Although Miyamoto actually recently said in the lead up to this movie that this was something that had been kind of planned, if not directly, executed on in the games. Whether you take him at his word for that or not, it gives a little bit more backstory to Peach's confusing status as the ruler of the Mushroom Kingdom and the Lord of the Toads, even though, of course, she's not one of them. Now, in terms of the references and stuff, and there's tons of references in these two movies to various Mario games and locations within the games and things like that. I was actually kind of surprised to see this movie open up with its first big scene where Mario and Luigi encounter Yoshi and team up with him right away. That was actually a location from Super Mario Odyssey, not Galaxy. Odyssey, of course, the most recent 3D platformer game from 9 years ago or so on the Switch. It's very much a smorgasbord approach of inspirations they take, right? Of course, Mario Kart had its moment in the first movie, after all. Donkey Kong Country, Diddy Kong Racing. There was a good amount of stuff brought in that first film. But they take that to the next level in the Super Mario Galaxy movie by introducing Star Fox, voiced by Glenn Powell. And now at this point, the cat's completely out of the bag that we are going to get a larger Nintendo universe on the big screen. I think everyone was pretty confident that would happen in some way. There's been some wish casting of, will they make like a Super Smash Brothers movie? Will that be Nintendo's version of an Avengers film? Maybe one day. I feel like we're still pretty far off from that, but there feels like there's just so much juice with adapting the Nintendo franchises on the big screen that we can definitely get there. And Star Fox having perhaps its best year ever with this surprise reveal in this movie, and a new Star Fox game confirmed for Switch 2 later this year. Star Fox has never been a big blockbuster franchise for Nintendo, but there's such an iconography with the visage of Fox, and I think Glenn Powell makes perfect sense to voice him, frankly. Of course, does that character and that character's placement in the movie make any sense to anyone watching this movie who doesn't already know who he is? No, the movie doesn't do any work to set up normal character relationships and explain general plot and storytelling. Again, this movie is completely not concerned with that. So you have to be someone just on board for the ride. Similarly, later on at the end of the movie, like the last big fight, Mr. Game & Watch shows up. Again, Smash Brothers reference, greater Nintendo reference. But you just see Game & Watch do 2D Game & Watch things for a brief moment. And that got claps in the audience when I saw that happen. But that makes no sense if you don't already know who Game & Watch is. Now, if you think about this like greater Nintendo storytelling approach, the next film we have up, of course, is the Legend of Zelda film coming out in about a year's time in May 2027. That's, of course, from Nintendo, but also from Sony. Illumination is not involved. That is, in fact, a live-action film. So how would that kind of thing play out? Would they eventually animate Link and Zelda for some future crossover? I think that's much more likely than taking everybody we've come to know in these two Mario movies and taking them into live action, right? So in conclusion, I'm not sure how well planned and how seeded this truly seems. Now, if we get news in a few weeks that a Star Fox film is in development, you probably can see where it's going to go. But yeah, I mean, as someone who recognizes and knows all the references when watching this movie, do I get a chuckle when I see that kind of thing? This time, a lot of Shy Guys, Monty Mole, Rob, the robot, showing up. Of course, I really like the Kamek character from these two movies, just really funny as the kind of sidekick crony of the Bowsers. Did I really need the baby Mario and baby Luigi moment in this movie? Not particularly. I find that aspect of the Super Mario Galaxy movie probably the most distracting, the most superfluous aspect. And again, it's another sequence that don't know if it has too much juice if you don't immediately recognize, oh, that's Baby Mario and Baby Luigi, and that being a distinct thing that exists in Nintendo games and whatnot. I also appreciate the Pikmin appearance in this movie as well. Again, definitely a surprise, and you've seen that before you see Star Fox. They definitely took all this to the next level. I thought they did a decent job with playing with the physics of Mario Galaxy and Mario in Space. I would have liked a little bit more than that. That was the true brilliance of the Mario Galaxy games and why those two games are so widely celebrated. But these movies, particularly this sequel, don't really make any time for a pause for any kind of character reflection. We're really just kind of on to the next one and just watching stuff happen. And again, if you like seeing these characters you recognize rendered, that's probably enough, but there's just very little depth here. And again, that's besides the point for all the kids going to see this. Of course, the movie's going to be a big hit. The first one was a big hit. Also opening, 5-day opening over Easter. 3 years later, here we are again. The tracking is under 200 million, but I have a hard time seeing this not opening to 200 million plus over the 5-day. I have no reason to doubt this movie would not come at least very close, if not slightly surpass the box office of the first one. Now, whether we are going to have a Zootopia 2, Inside Out 2 type of sensation remains to be seen. The family audience has been largely underserved since Zootopia 2, which of course legged out for months and months, completely dusting Avatar in the end, which is not something I expected. But apart from the animated basketball movie GOAT, has been a lot of kids stuff lately. So I think Mario really has a ton of room to run until Mandalorian and Grogu comes out in like 6 weeks. And I know Project Hail Mary has been attracting some crossover family audience as well. But you have to imagine Mario is going to hurt Project Hail Mary more than Project Hail Mary is going to hurt Mario. You'd have to imagine. So I expect this movie to be obviously incredibly gigantic. And if you think about the biggest movies of the year, I mean, Avengers Doomsday, Spider-Man Brand New Day, this is probably third, right? The Odyssey, probably under this. Dune Part 3, probably under this. Mandalorian and Grogu, probably under this. So this is one of our big movie events of the year. Let me know, what did you think of the Super Mario Galaxy movie? Do you get past the very obvious and overt quibbles when it comes to this movie working as a film because you like the references? Let me know. Where do you sit with it? And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.